Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this luxurious auditorium. I'm Alan Rusbridger. I'm editor of Prospect magazine, and if you're wondering, the journalism happens right at the top in the shabby end of the building, but this is the luxury end of the building. And I'm delighted that you've all managed to brave the weather to come to this event this morning. We're hosting it in association with Offshore Energies UK. And we're going to be talking about some of the most urgent and complex questions about the UK's energy future. We've got two panels this morning featuring leading voices from industry, policy, sustainability and innovation. This first session is exploring how the North Sea can continue to secure growth in a changing energy landscape. The government's consultation on this subject closes next week. Then after a short break, we'll continue and we're going to broaden the lens to look at how the UK can lead globally on green growth and climate transformation. And just on timings, our first session is going to run until about 10:30. There'll then be a break for coffee upstairs. We'll reconvene at 11 for the second panel, which is going to be chaired by Prospect's contributing editor, Isabel Hilton. And that wraps up at about midday, and then there's a light lunch. There's a couple of changes to this lineup. Gerda Verberg and Lord Stephen send their sincere apologies. They've both had unavoidable commitments, and they're sorry they can't be with us. But we're delighted to be joined by Barry McLeod, who brings a wealth of insight into offshore wind and the North Sea's evolving role, and Stephen Scheel from the Net Zero Technology Centre. So to this first panel, the future of the North Sea and securing growth, in which we're going to be discussing and exploring how this critical region, controversial region, is adapting, what this means for net zero security and economic growth. And we've got a great panel of speakers, which I'm just going to introduce very briefly. On my left is Louise Kingham, who is the Senior Vice President for Europe and Head of Country at BP. She leads BP's business across the UK and continental Europe, forging partnerships, shaping energy policy and scaling decarbonised energy solutions. She's a former CEO of the Energy Institute, I've got that right, and is a passionate advocate for inclusive leadership in the net zero transition. Next, we've got Barry McLeod, Managing Director at Flotation Energy, which is leading its global offshore wind projects, including the Pioneer Greenvolt and Senos, if I pronounce that right, wind farms in the Scottish North Sea. He's got deep experience in the offshore engineering and project delivery, and he plays a keen role across several industry boards and in shaping the UK's offshore energy future. Next along is Stephen Scheel. Thank you for coming, Stephen, Director of Government Affairs at the Net Zero Technology Centre, which is a not-for-profit organisation whose mission is to work with industry, government and academia to accelerate the energy transition to net zero. And Stephen is passionate about achieving the energy transition and reducing fuel poverty. And finally, David Whitehouse, who's the Chief Executive of Offshore Energies UK. He's got 30 years of experience across global energy, a PhD that's very impressive in theoretical chemistry, that's even more impressive, and is now studying renewable engineering. He leads OE UK's strategic direction, championing innovation, energy security, and balanced transition to net zero. So I hope they've all been primed to come up with a very short opening statement so that we can just get their respective positions. And Louise, why don't you go first?
Thanks very much, Alan. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you. In terms of opening remarks, clearly BP's been in the North Sea for at least 6 decades in terms of actually operating, and over a century actually present in Scotland. So long history of being active in the North Sea, specifically around oil and gas development, obviously, and creating the economic value, the job opportunities, the community benefits that all of that provides, which is the opportunity for growth. And it's also, I think, an opportunity as we look forward to be able to continue to provide those benefits and those opportunities. And at the same time, we can start to think about, and we're already in the throes of developing the projects, which will mean we can transition over a period of a number of years some of that work, some of that business into some of our transition projects around offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, green and blue, already building green hydrogen in Aberdeen as it happens. And we have a blue project that we want to pursue in Teesside alongside the carbon capture and storage facility, which has had final investment decision taken just before Christmas. So we can see that transition. We're investing in it actively. We can see a workforce that is very motivated, and we can see a lot of community opportunity in the transition. And really what underpins that is the invaluable resource that we have and the capability that we have in and around the North Sea.
That was amazingly concise. You've done this before. I mean, you're very good. Barry, see if you can match that.
Oh, I don't know if I can match that. Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name's Barry McLeod, and so I'm Managing Director with Flotation Energy. Flotation Energy, we've been going for, 5-6 years now, and we've got included in our portfolio within the UK, we've got 3 floating wind projects and 1 fixed bottom project. The idea with our floating wind projects is that they're stepping stone projects. So we've got a Celtic Sea test and demonstration project, 100 megawatts. We've got 2 floating projects in the INTOG leasing round. So one of those is called Greenvolt, which was successful winning a CFD, 400 megawatt CFD last year. And the other one, Senos, which is sort of Greenvolt's big brother, is up to 1.4 gigawatts. Our heritage comes from the Kincardine floating wind project just off the coast of Aberdeen, and that was created by our founding directors. And I mentioned that we've got stepping stone projects. It's interesting the way these things start to play out because, you know, Kincardine was 50 megawatts, Whitecross is 100 megawatts, and Greenvolt, the plan is to make it actually 560 megawatts. We've got slightly out of sequence because of consenting. So actually Greenvolt is now the one that's going first, and Whitecross is second, and then Senos. So that's maybe enough in terms of opening remark from me.
That's very good too. Why don't you go next?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name's Stephen Shield, and I'm a stand-in for someone else. So one of the benefits of being a stand-in is that I have not had days and weeks to think about this panel, nor have I been briefed up to the hilt as to what messaging to land. So I'm going to come and talk from my heart about my experience working with technology companies that have basically their genesis in the North Sea, where it's in the oil and gas sector or the renewable sector. Hugely important element, technology and innovation. It's driven the success of the North Sea over the last 50, 60 years. We've done things deeper. We've gone, you know, in terms of seabeds, reaching the seabed. We've directional drilling. All sorts of great technologies have emerged from the North Sea. I really want to kind of like shout out the supply chain today. So I want to talk about the supply chain and the technology base that we have here, built from the activity that we've done over the last 50 or so years, and how that must transition, and it must become part of a new energy system, but it needs to be an integrated energy system, and it needs to be balanced. It needs to be very much supply chain opportunities have to be there in terms of the innovation opportunities. We need to keep the innovation here in the UK, and we need to export the products and the services and the technologies that we build and develop here in the lab, the living lab that is the North Sea. Hugely important for jobs, hugely important for growth. And in the current future of the North Sea consultation, speak from the heart, I will say I was disappointed to see that technology and innovation wasn't actually highlighted in that consultation document. Technology was mentioned. There was brief mention of hydrogen and carbon capture and storage, but there wasn't anything specifically asked about the future of technology and innovation as part of that discussion about the North Sea. So that's really what I want to talk about. I want to big up my colleagues in the supply chain who are really driving technology, have been for years, and just want the opportunity to do more of it.
Well, you didn't prepare, but you managed to come in on time. Well done. David, why don't you just round off this round?
Yeah, so I've worked in oil and gas for the last 30 years and worked in the North Sea for the last 20 odd. The North Sea has always, for me, been a real badge of honour. Where we work, it has truly powered our country. It's created huge economic value for the UK. And I think the conversation today is that was been true for the last 50 years. It should be true for the next 50 and beyond. And how do we do that? The UK, we are so lucky. We have the wind resources. We can store more carbon in our reservoirs than carbon that we produced since the Industrial Revolution. It's a great opportunity for UK industry, but it's a great opportunity for our engagement with Europe. We have the technology. And quite frankly, we have an excellent oil and gas sector and hundreds of thousands of highly skilled people working in the sector. If you had to choose somewhere to drive a successful energy transition, it's the UK and Scotland. It really is. Part of the reason I do my job and part of the reason we have this conversation, I think, though, is I took it on. I've always been proud of that. I come from an industrial background. I feel we are careless with our industries in the UK. And I think that's the wrong path. And we are at risk of a polarised debate that takes all those fantastic ingredients and we fumble the opportunity for the UK to yes, decarbonise a society, but decarbonise it in a way that creates real value. And so for me, part of the debate is how do we move from polarisation to actually a very clear path of how we create value out of this unbelievable human and natural resource we have in the UK.
What a professional panel. I'm going to ask you individual questions in a second, but just listening to you and listening to the debate in general, I'm going to ask a general question of all of you, jump in any way, which is, I think we've moved a great deal in terms of public opinion away from having people who deny the reality of what's happening. But I think there's quite a lot of skepticism about two things. One is whether technology is actually in this country actually going to be able to deliver the energy we need at the scale that we need. And the second is about the pace of change and the time scale over which this is achievable. So there's a willingness to be persuaded, but I think a lot of people aren't persuaded at the moment. Do you want to say something about that? Either of those, whether the technology and the time scale are just not aligned?
I think, Alan, pace is challenged. I think that's a really fair observation. And I think there's two things we need to do. The pace of decision making needs to be faster, and then the pace of execution needs to be faster. And that brings down the cost of what you're trying to do. It gives you the opportunity to deploy people in supply chains, technology in supply chains as efficiently as you can. And I think that's part of the improvement, if you like, we've got to try and make to continue to have that leadership opportunity in the UK that we have had in more recent times and not lose that kind of first mover advantage, particularly on some of the technology and industry creation opportunities, like in CCS and hydrogen, for example, where we have got some groundbreaking sort of regulatory and policy opportunities over the line, which didn't happen in the US, they didn't happen in the Middle East, they happened here first. And that's something that we really need to then motor on with and progress. And I think the issue of the polarised debate, for me, and I speak to lots of different groups as part of my day job and have some really interesting conversations. For me, it's about the conversation around energy is predominantly one around price and affordability. And, which camp are you in terms of that polarisation of the debate? It's not about the value of the resource and the value, as Dave was talking about, to the economy and what it does for people, jobs, the exchequer, the GVA, and so on and so forth. And also just the value it brings to enable life for all of us underpins everything that we do. But that's kind of invisible. So the debate gets skewed, I think. And I think if you look at some of the surveys, certainly some of the things I have come across my desk, there's still an awful lot of support for the transition and for tackling and addressing climate challenge. I don't think you can expect members of the public, unless they've got it happening in their backyard, they're unlikely to be deeply embedded and interested in the technological development, how it all works and so on and so forth. So they will take from the headlines and snippets from the information that we're bombarded with. So I think that's where we all have a responsibility to try and inform and educate, but also actively listen and engage in that conversation so that we can try and make progress on that part of it too. And that's a collective, I think, endeavour.
Can I just understand your point on pace? Because you're saying it really needs to go faster.
Yeah.
But I suppose some people looking at BP recently, it looks as though BP is saying, oh, hold on a minute, this is going too fast. We need more time.
I think our challenge has been the opposite, Alan, actually. And I think if people have listened and heard what Murray said at the Investor Day, that was we went too quick and too broad from 2020, and everyone else was not with us. And so we were not being rewarded in terms of returns and cash flow and all the things that businesses need to provide in terms of value to their owners in a way that was keeping the activities in balance. So we've had to, and 3/4 of the investment programme in the UK is pointing at low carbon investment. Some of the things I've already mentioned, we've taken final investment decision on and are putting spades, shovels, diggers in the ground and getting on with it. So it's certainly in the UK, there is a very balanced portfolio of investment across oil, gas, offshore wind, carbon capture, green and blue hydrogen, as well as our traditional sort of forecourt businesses where BP will be visible to the customer, probably more so understood. So I think that's the challenge that has been we need to try and keep in pace at the rate of spending and investment. And also across that diversity of portfolio, we have to find smart ways to spend the money. And within BP's capital frame, which is, every company's got its limits, there are limitations on how much we can push debt and how much we can push different opportunities for financing, for example, across that suite. So what we talk about is doing things in partnership. JERA and the offshore wind joint venture we are building at the moment for the summer is a good example, where we partner with a well-known, long-established Japanese partner to create the top 5 offshore wind company globally. That's no small effort, I don't think, and it's not an insignificant contribution to that low carbon transition.
So your challenge is to persuade people that BP is as committed as ever.
Yeah, still a net
you
zero.
can only move as fast as everyone else is moving.
Absolutely, Alan. I think still a net zero, intending to be net zero company by 2050 or sooner. We have reduced Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 38% since the baseline 2019 measurement. I think IEA will say good looks like pitch for minus 25% by 2030. So we are in good shape for that. We also have a further commitment to 2030 to reduce those emissions by 45 to 50%. And so we're obviously shooting for the bigger number. So yeah, absolutely. But the reality is, if you don't keep this in balance as a transition over a long period of time, we will not be able to keep the investment flowing and the energy flowing in the way that we want to. And so that's what this rebalancing has been about.
Yeah. I mean, you're doing immensely ambitious engineering projects. How do you persuade people that this is technologically feasible and that the timetable is reasonable?
So I think it is technologically feasible. We've got the Kincardine floating wind farm that's out there now. You can go and visit and see it, and we encourage people to do that. I'll maybe just come back to the pace point, because I think that I agree we need pace, but it needs to be managed in the right way. And I think what doesn't work and what's caused the problem is, take ScotWind, for example, a massive leasing round where we've just, rented half the seabed and we've got all of these wind farms and a huge pipeline, supposedly. But the problem is there's no coordination there in terms of national grid. And so a lot of those projects are stranded. And so all you do there is you send out this mixed message that's, we need a pace of change, and we're gonna lease all of this area, and we're gonna have all of these magnificent projects. But actually the reality is they're not real projects. They've got to get a grid connection, they've got to get consented, they've got to get through CFD. They're years away from being real projects. And so that's a real problem, I think, that we've got in the UK. And I think, some good work by Chris Stark and the Clean Power 2030, they've recognised the problem with grid. We've got to accelerate some of these projects to make sure that there's less of the offshore wind farms are stranded. And I think in terms of driving the technology, if you've got a real pipeline of credible projects, the supply chain and the technology will start to look after itself. And that's the what we need in terms of industrialization and commercialization to bring costs down, it comes from that. But at the moment, I think we've got this disconnect. And so if we apply pace in the wrong way, in the wrong manner, without being joined up, it's a huge problem for the sector.
And do you feel the government understands that and is on top of it?
I think they're saying the right things. I mean, I guess another aspect in terms of my concern and why I support OE UK is that, I think the transition, the understanding of the transition is a transition, and that takes time, and that takes a long time. And I don't think there's an appreciation of, so this polarization of can we have oil and gas or can we have renewables? It's not flicking a switch. It's a long time, decades in the making. And I don't think government, I believe they don't properly get that, because from a floating wind perspective in the UK, we need that oil and gas supply chain. We need the skills. I'm 25 years from oil and gas before I transitioned into renewables. And that transition is not so difficult if the pipeline is there. But if oil and gas tapers off too quick, you don't have the supply chain here, you don't have those skills here to get the benefit for those future floating wind projects.
Stephen, do you want to answer that same question?
Yeah, well, with your original question, I'm taking it you were referring to sort of doubts about some technologies like carbon capture and storage at scale, perhaps.
But all of them,
hydrogen.
Just reading the press, a common theme is that this is all, it's a lovely talk, but it's not actually going to keep the lights on.
Okay, well, effectively, the oil and gas industry, which again I've worked in for a long time before joining the Net Zero Technology Centre, really good at gases as it happens. We're really good at kind of finding gases and transporting gases and storing gases and keeping gases in the reservoirs. We've kind of nailed that, all the physics and all the kind of mechanics of doing that. And hydrogen, if it emerges as a credible industry, a scaled-up industrial sector, is just a gas, right? So we will solve the problems associated with that. There still are some technical problems to be solved. There's no doubt about that. But we have the ingenuity, we have the experience in our sector to do that. And carbon capture is, again, CO2 is just a gas. And there are problems with certain elements of the technology to make sure that once you put gas back into a reservoir, that you can monitor it effectively, that you can make sure that it doesn't migrate where it shouldn't or leak. And you have solutions for that, but also there are solutions that need to be devised for things like, keeping the gas in the well and making sure valves work at low temperatures and all sorts of things. But again, we can solve those problems. I often quote, is it Matt Damon who's in the film Mars, when he's stranded on Mars? And basically he's a botanist, but he's trying to survive. And, excuse me for using his language, but we can science the shit out of this. We can absolutely solve these problems. So I don't think that this is an issue at scale. What the issue really is the market, the economics. There is no hydrogen industry to speak of at scale. If there was, we'd be producing tremendous amounts of the stuff. So that's the question. Is it economical for us to do this? And I'm not an economist, but I know from a technology perspective, we can certainly, meet those challenges, and they will be safe, and it will be secure, and it will be up to the standards that we've always enjoyed in this country from when it comes to our energy supply, energy distribution. It'll be absolutely top notch. And we'll be able to export those technologies to other parts of the world. So in terms of the energy transition and jobs moving from traditional oil and gas into new sectors like a hydrogen or carbon capture and storage, there's at least 80% transferability of skill sets there. So that is an opportunity, and there's no doubt about it, but it needs to be an economic opportunity as well as a technology opportunity for it to actually emerge. Now, whether our European neighbours decide that hydrogen is absolutely going to be a big play and they need, industrial quantities of the stuff, once that decision is made and they start to actually go out and source that, then perhaps we can play a part in being a provider of that product. And we can do things like build pipelines to transport hydrogens, or we can, make ships that can accommodate that to get the hydrogen to the marketplace. So all of that's fixable. The technology's there. There are tweaks to be made, huge opportunities for the supply chain. And that's why the supply chain is keen. To go back to Barry's point, projects drive growth, projects drive innovation. You need the projects for the supply chain to actually rise to the challenge. Once we've got the projects online, once the economics are sorted out, and as the actual things getting built, the supply chain will absolutely rise to that challenge, and we will see new technologies emerge, and we'll see existing technologies being adopted a lot faster.
David, do you want to talk about those two things, and maybe in a political context in which at the moment you've got a pretty supportive government, but looking forward 4 years down the road, who knows whether the political support will be there.
So I think when you talk about pay, so we do have I think some of the things the government are doing, when you talk about pace, we need to make it easier to get work done. And I think a lot of the work that's going on with Chris Stark and Mission Control, I think, is reforming some of our planning concerns, etc. I think those are really important things that the government is doing. I think to some degree, the government we have today is still hasn't quite landed where it needs to be with that balance between oil and gas and renewables. And I think one of the key things we need to deliver, in my view, is that recognition is not a battle but one versus the other. In the UK and actually globally, you need both, and we should embrace both. So I think we have more work to do with government to get them in that place. The fundamental thing about pace, in my mind, though, is this whole thing that in reality, to speed things up, there's always going to be trade-offs. My own view, clean power by 2030, brilliant. But if we deliver that in a way where we don't grow a UK supply chain, there's a real risk on that. I'm not sure we should be patting ourselves on the back. If we deliver clean power by 2030 and it turns out the rhetoric around price isn't true, I'm not sure we should pat ourselves on the back on that either. So absolutely we should do things at pace. But I'll tell you what, there's a balancing act to be managed. And in my view, it is making sure we do create jobs in the UK, that we do create manufacturing capability for the things that we are brilliant at. And we have to do it with a clear-eyed focus on price as well. So I think you can get pace, but you need that. Often what we talk about, I need to be careful, I'll get sacked by some of my members, but often what people will talk about is, well, here's the plan, we need 50 gig of this and 10 gig of that, and it's all good. The problem is, in reality, somebody's paying for that because it's not economic today. It's not economic today. The reason why we need to do these things is because I think fixed wind is a brilliant example. 10 years ago, not economic. The UK has driven a path where actually that now is competitive. That's not true of floating wind yet, or hydrogen, or carbon storage. And so quite often you hear people talking about, we want to go at pace, but what they really mean is we need the money. We need the support. And I think actually we need to be more honest about that. And then in the world we live in, there are priorities. And I think industry needs to be doing a better job of focusing on the economics of it. That actually the first floating wind farms at scale the CFD for that is expensive, but showing that very clear path of how these things become competitive. And I think we're missing that piece. So at pace, at scale, I think and demonstrating the path where it is economic, we need to be absolutely focused on a success here. So coming back to where we want to be in 5 years' time, I sit here, I took on my job because I want to see the UK do well. I quite frankly want to see the UK deal with our climate emergencies, but in a way that creates jobs. And we've got to deliver it in a way that is successful. And in 5 years' time, we've got to remove this polarisation, and we've got to have a clear focus that this is genuinely creating jobs in the UK. The communities are seeing the real benefit it. We're not making decisions which actually, like stopping licenses, which feels like it is vindictive against some of those who work in the sector and some of the people in places where I live. And actually there is a clear focus that actually for the UK to compete, our manufacturing industries are hemorrhaging jobs. We need to be driving with a very, not through rhetoric, but a clear focus on how this actually makes the UK more economically viable. Actually, quite frankly, how our energy prices are genuinely lower. We need to, 5 years' time, we as a country need to deliver that.
David talks about polarisation. I've only known you half an hour, but I sense your job involves going out into lots of situations where the debate is very polarised and it's either or. So how do you persuade people that we can make the North Sea answer all those questions from a climate change perspective, from a security standpoint, energy security standpoint, and in terms of the sort of rather optimistic version that I'm sure we would all love to see that we've heard from David?
I don't know if you can persuade. You can definitely inform, I think. And I think Dave's already said quite a few of the things that I would say around doing that information. And you can show by, testament to what your experience is and what your delivery has been. We've had 60 years in the North Sea as a company, and we're just one of a significant number. We've spent 5.3 billion on that supply chain. That's 3,000 companies, and they're not all in Scotland. They go from the top of the UK to the bottom of the UK, and it's very well dispersed in terms of economic value, job opportunity, community benefit that results from doing that. So it's not only the impact of where you're actually doing the business. In the kind of and not or conversations, I will talk with in private some really interesting groups who will be very much in favour of the transition. Let's turn the taps off on the oil and gas as quickly as we possibly can, and you need to do more. With a wagging finger, say. Actually, the ambition to go as quickly as we can, but with the caveats of making it economically successful and doing that job creation and all the things that have been spoken about, that takes longer than that call to action usually is requesting. And so it's just about trying to inform with the realism of what the lived experience is. And, we're the ones sitting there putting down billions of pounds of investment. So I feel it's a credible conversation that we can have. But I also need to be actively listening to those folks who are in a different place and trying to have that conversation to build understanding. So I do spend a lot of time doing that. And partly that's because I spent 3 decades in the non-profit before I went to BP 4 years ago. So I'm a slightly unusual hire in that sense as well. And I'm probably in a smaller number of folks that do it that way.
So just to build on what Louise said, I mean, it's the reason why I'm not a politician. But so we did, as lots of people, we do polling, and what you actually find, generally speaking, the UK there's good consensus that we need to tackle climate change. It needs to be done in a way that's affordable. There's a minority who deny the science, and there's a minority who. It is the other version of that, which is fundamentally deny the engagement of any industry in the whole thing. But the vast majority of people sit right in the middle. So I think it's there. I mean, we are at risk though of, but sometimes I feel you'd never guess that if what you read and what you see, I don't think represents where the UK, where the population is. I think we need to do a better job of leading the population down a very simple, straightforward path, which absolutely, we'll deal with climate change and we'll deal with it in a way that's affordable. So I think there's more of that needs to come. Whenever we poll, we have this issue of licensing. The Climate Change Committee says we're going to need 15 billion barrels of oil and gas between now and 2050 on that net zero pathway. That's what the Climate Change Committee tells us, 15 billion barrels. The UK is on track to produce about 4. So we're on track to produce about a third, less than a third of what we need. With the right policy in place and with things like, a proper fiscal regime, things like being able to get projects consented and indeed access to acreage, the UK could produce another 3 billion barrels. And the truth of that is we're going to use that oil and gas anyway. And the choice is, do we produce it ourselves or do we import it? If we do it that way, we support loads of jobs. That adds that extra 3 billion, that's about 150 billion pounds of extra value in our economy, which is extra tax, extra communities, all this great stuff. And in reality, it's stuff we're going to need anyway. Why? As a former minister told me, we need to do a better job of just explaining the absolute basics of why is that even contentious? That we're creating value, and that is something that we need to do alongside that acceleration. And quite frankly, it will help accelerate that because that 150 billion pounds supports the supply chains that Stephen was speaking about, and it creates value for that investment in some of these things which are not economic today. So I think that. I think the polarisation, it is there for us to win. The public are there. And I think we need to do a better job of advocating a very straightforward and simple message.
So I'm amazed at the polarization. It even comes into the technology conversation and innovation conversation, because there are groups that just will adamantly, say that carbon capture and storage is a bad thing to do at scale, and that hydrogen is a bad thing to foster as an industrial sector, and that's all quite alarming as a technologist, because all we're trying to do is make sure that the technologies that we're producing are as low cost as possible, as safe as possible, and actually meet the needs that our industrial society needs to achieve. But you do get that polarization coming into technology conversations, and it's really quite alarming. So I don't know how to deal with that. Maybe you have to take
the question that some people ask is, they say, are we really serious about net zero? Because if we were, we would have clear dates for phasing out oil and gas, mandatory investment in renewables, tougher stance on accountability.
I don't think that's being serious about net zero. I think that's about making choices. So you're making choices, but the net zero path to net zero is not a linear line. It's going to be a winding path. There'll be lots of different ways to get there, and lots of different routes that perhaps we go down that might be a bit of a dead end. But I think that's what our society will have to experience. I think if you have that, let's achieve it by X date, that's a very challenging thing. It's great. I think that's great to actually put a line in the sand or a flag in the earth and say that's what you have to achieve. And it actually does drive innovation, it does drive activity. But as long as it's achievable, it needs to be something that we can realistically get to. And having that linear mindset that worries me a little bit.
Well, I think also if you don't create the economic value proposition in the course of doing that, all you do is you send capital somewhere else in the world and it will leave the UK. And that's a huge missed opportunity and would be really foolhardy. So I think we have to also be cognizant of our place in the world. And actually the world's a relatively small place in terms of capital flows and how easy it is to redirect investment. So I think you have to be really, really thoughtful. Somebody had said to me, well, we'll just mandate oil and gas out the system. So, well, you won't, because the capital will just go somewhere else in the world, because the world still needs oil and gas. Yeah. So until these transitions, we're living in a phase of addition, right? So we've still got a lot of people in the world who don't have access to clean energy, let alone clean energy. So these transitions are and. It's not or, and it's over a long period of time. And I think if you try to, I'm all for being encouraged and incentivized to go quicker, but if actually it's a gun to the head, all you will do is lose the value that we could create and capture here in the UK. And that is a real worry for our supply chain capability, because then we would lose that too, which would be a huge, huge loss.
People sometimes present regulation as an obstacle to the kind of work that you're trying to do, but I sense from the way that some of you are talking, actually, as long as you've got a level playing field for everyone and clear rules, regulation can be a help.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just 3 years into offshore wind and renewables now. And I mean, one of the things for me was it's a real eye-opener in terms of the regulation and the regulatory hurdles that you've got to get after. And I think, again, coming back to, Clean Power 2030 and some of the objectives there about acceleration and to get back to this pace point, we do need to find a more straightforward pathway to make sure that these projects can move forward, from a consenting perspective, because a lot of them get tied up in judicial reviews or challenge, and so they can be years in the making. So I think we've got a responsibility to simplify that. And I think there's some good initiatives. There's some good collaboration between industry and government. We've got the industrial growth plan that's up and running. There's I'm part of the Offshore Wind Industry Council, which is, we sit on that with members of DESNES, and so there is a lot of looking at how we can try and improve this and make it more of a straightforward pathway. But I think the economic part of this is that it's we need to realise it's not a quick and easy fix. And winning the CFD for Greenvolt last year was fantastic for us. But as Dave said, it's a high cost. So that translates to a high cost to the consumer. But you need to have, in terms of that technology, you need to have that high cost to start with, and then that pipeline can bring the costs down. So it's not a quick fix.
Now, there's no such thing as a free croissant in this building. I'm hoping we've got a very knowledgeable audience. We've got a microphone there, so I'm hoping that somebody's going to stick up, some brave soul's going to stick up their hand. And here we go, brave soul. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Jemima Brown-Bland from Arup. Thanks very much for the panel this morning and for the conversation, which I think the word confidence really distills a lot of the questions here. Whether regulation can provide confidence, consumer confidence, investor confidence, and therefore momentum towards scale. So a lot of us know each other and talk to each other quite a bit. So my question is to you, Alan, if I may. What will Prospect do to help grow confidence in our transition in the North Sea and therefore enable it? Thanks.
Gosh, I thought I was asking a question. I'll have to be paid extra for this. There is a serious point about journalism which I think really struggles with this issue and in general, because journalism is much more comfortable describing what happened yesterday than predicting what's going to happen in 20 years' time. I think there's a further problem with journalism and climate change, that it has become very ideological. I think the moment journalists come into work thinking, well, what does my organisation think about this? What's my organisation's line on this? As opposed to where do the facts lead me? Then you're in trouble. And I think not all, but some of British journalism is in that mind frame. And you see quite a lot of research. I chair the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism that does periodic reports on how journalism is dealing with climate change. And there is a lot of the thing that I was talking about earlier of skepticism about net zero and its achievability and its desirability, which has replaced a sort of proxy for what used to be out-and-out denial of the science. And I don't think that's a good thing. And in the research, you can see certain titles, I won't name them, Daily Telegraph, are trapped in one mindset. That would be my answer. But I'm here to ask the questions. So we've got two more questions here. Oh, we've got one there. Right. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Steve Pye from University College London. First question was to David. I just wondered if you could expand on the point around we need to produce what we use, given that most of the oil is exported. So could you just sort of clarify that? And then the second point is really on pace. We're still aiming to open up new production projects despite limited energy security benefits and misalignment with climate science. So to what extent does the focus on opening up new production distract from the investment in the clean tech space, which has been pretty slow? And what could government do to really kickstart that investment? Thank you.
I'm going to take the second question for you. Okay. Yeah, but first question for David.
Yeah, so the first question for me on the, producing your own oil and gas and if it exports, should we do that? So the simple fact is all the gas we produce, give or take, ends up in the national grid. 28 million homes get heated by that today. 25 million homes get heated by it. So the gas we produce ends up in our grid, absolutely. It is, for me, we have chosen not to have the refining capability that we did have in this country. So we choose not to refine our own oil, the majority of our own oil and gas. And so we send it somewhere else, and it is largely a global ecosystem where it is refined. So we produce it, and then we receive it back as a refined product. I'm probably 20 years too late, I think, but the UK losing that refining capability, I think, is not the right path for the UK. Most of that oil that we produce ends up in Europe. I think when people talk about energy security, I think hopefully people are now looking at energy security more broadly than simply in nationalistic terms. Absolutely, it is a European issue as well. The climate science. So there's absolutely the climate science is robust on emissions. But I think where I think there's an absolute debate is the UK is going to use oil and gas. Should we produce it ourselves or not? Should we support jobs or not? Should we put that £150 billion in our economy to do all the other things that we talk about or not? My own view is absolutely. And when we take a path that undermines communities, that feels absolutely like we are doing something against those who work in the sector, I think that pushes back the opportunity, in my view. It just does not resonate. We touched on it earlier, this thing about climate leadership. And is climate leadership about setting targets? To some degree, absolutely it is. But one of the things, and actually the IEA, I think, is strong on this, climate leadership is about working with people and with communities and doing things that work for people and communities. And I think quite often we lose sight of that. So should we produce our own oil and gas? Well, we use it, yes, in my view. And why should you do that? You are bringing people with you. You're putting value into our economy. You're supporting the supply chains who are already investing in that broader transition, and you are bringing people with you. So absolutely, I think it is a robust argument. And actually, I think it takes us down the wrong path when it feels that communities around Britain feel like things are being done to them. It will stop the momentum on dealing with a net zero if we have too many communities that feel like things are being done to them.
It's a good question about why are we still talking about opening up more fields when it's a distraction from what we should really be talking about?
My view, very simply, is it's not a distraction because you've got to do both things. And you've got to do that in the context of a transition over a period of time. In terms of managing the supply chain. The supply chain need the revenues from the work that it does in the oil and gas system at the moment in order to fund its own investments in people and kit for the transition. They have specifically asked that needs to be managed really carefully. That's on us as investors and operators that rely on the supply chain to try and help and support that. And there are a number of things that we're asking for in trade strategies, industrial strategies, and various other things that the government is currently trying to piece together as master plan, if you like, where we need to try and underpin and support that transition for the supply chain too. So it's not a trade-off. You're not taking one from the other. My UK investment programme, 3/4 is pointing at low carbon, a quarter is pointing at the oil and gas industry. That oil and gas business in the North Sea has reduced its emissions by 33%, I think, since 2019 baseline. Methane is at zero. We've in all of our upstream operations have methane emissions detection technology. AI is underpinning a lot of that work, and we're already there and in a good place. So I think to Dave's point, or you can have the choice of not to have the economic value of doing all of that in balance, and thinking about how you move supply chains, how you move workforce, how you benefit communities in the process of doing that over a long period of time. Or you can import the LNG from somewhere else in the world at 4 times the carbon, because the country's not going to switch off the demand for oil and gas and create that cliff edge. It's got to be managed over a period of time so that we can keep the lights on, keep the system stable, and also introduce more resilience into the system at the same time, which is what we need to do.
Question over here.
Thank you, Nick Mabey from E3G. We're a climate change think tank working across Europe and globally on all these issues. You have two questions to pick up. A lot of it's about demand for investment and forward market certainty, and we'd certainly agree, and a lot of that's going to come from Europe. So what would you like to come out of the UK-Europe summit in terms of an ambitious vision for how we develop the North Sea with our partners in Europe, given that the politics, for multiple reasons, seem to be swinging the right way, and perhaps we can raise the ceiling of ambition a bit. So really interested in what you and we might be saying to them. And the second one is, there is a little bit of we're not grass and nettle here, is yes, we need lots of different things. We worked on CCS, we worked on green hydrogen, we work on renewables, mostly efficiency, which no one talks about. The fact is not all are going to win at the scale every industrial booster is promoting. And there are going to be some green elephants. The Germans are already scaling back their green hydrogen demand as electrification technologies in industry get better. How do we and you touched on it, how do we persuade the public that's okay if we're going to go fast? Because I don't think hiding it and then blaming people for failed industrial investment is going to be a good idea. So it's really interesting because I think we need to be honest to keep the consensus. But there was a little bit around here that all of these things can win. They really can't.
I just don't see
But we
that-
do need to try everything. So it's a massive problem I worry about politically at the centre of this debate.
Yeah, I just don't see what the anxiety is. I mean, you try things, it doesn't work, you move on. I mean, industrial revolutions are replete with examples of failed technologies and failed options that were tried. And from the scale of how wide our railway tracks should be to what kind of engines should be on them, I mean, there's all sorts of dead ends in terms of technology and innovation. The fact is, we should be trying things. We should be because of the challenge of climate change, and because of the challenge of how do we keep an industrial society in employment, producing products and services that are wanted and needed. We should be willing to accept that there will be things that don't work out, and that's history. That's how industrial revolutions have always operated.
I think it's also, for me, it's as someone that's driving some of this investment into many of these things, it's about work. One of the things we've learned over the last 5 years of working through this strategy is just get really smart about what's the use case. So lots of hype about certain things, but actually when you get really granular about it and really focused on where are those pounds or dollars or euros going to go, it's because you've got clear on the use case. So the carbon capture and storage for us and the blue hydrogen is about decarbonising industrial use, right? Heavy industry, which has got limited options and can't deal with intermittency. It needs that security, that baseload opportunity. So it's how do you take the carbon out of those feedstocks, of that power supply, et cetera, and provide that for that specific use case. We had an interesting journey with heavy duty mobility with OEMs. Is it hydrogen or is it batteries? Which way are we going to go? And so we listened to the customer. We ran pilots for both, and then we listened to the customer. The OEM ultimately said we're going to go battery for now, and then the hydrogen might come later. So that rebases and repaces how we think about where we put those dollars, euros, or pounds down. To your point, to your question about Europe, switching hats, the other half of the day job. If Europe sticks with through its new policy framework, sort of similar targets and similar ambitions around the transition, there's real opportunities to partner on some of these things. Hydrogen production has already been mentioned. CCS storage, there is a mandate presently. There are not the stores. That needs to be delivered by the UK and Norway, and there's room for a lot of collaboration there. So I think there's some really discrete, smart infrastructure and partnership opportunities between us and our European partners on the transition journey.
I think we've got time for one more question. Yeah.
Thank you, Graham Stewart, Member of Parliament and Energy Minister till April last year. Two aspects we haven't really focused on the North Sea today, but one is tidal. Any comments perhaps from Stephen or others on that? And the other is, and it follows up slightly from Nick's question on the sort of North Sea Summit, interconnectors, the hybrid assets, a little more insight into any views on how best to engage with our neighbours and create mutually advantageous assets across the North Sea. The hybrid ones being not just a interconnector, but then linking that to offshore wind at the same time. And then there's lots of regulatory and battles over who gets the value from various pieces. But it's a really interesting thing to get right. But I'd love to hear from the panel on those two subjects.
Tidal interconnectors.
On the tidal thing, we think that's still an extremely interesting technology play to be looking at. There are challenges that we've got a very strong tidal profile at the north of Scotland, as you know, hugely consistent, could generate a huge amount of electricity. It's some technical challenges to be solved, and we have been talking to partners to hopefully come up with some technologies and innovations that might allow us to actually pitch some of this to industry to want to get involved in. On the interconnectors piece, we did a huge study and with a consortium of industry partners on the feasibility of producing hydrogen from wind, essentially, and then shipping that hydrogen in a pipeline from the north of Scotland all right down to the United Kingdom, with offtakes going off at certain points to the east coast, and landing either in either in the Netherlands or in Germany. Massive amounts of interest from Europe in that project, especially the German federal government, hugely interested in that, and we've had quite a lot of take up and interest in that particular project from DESNZ and from other industry partners, as well as the consortium members involved. And again, lots of technology challenges, when you're kind of piping hydrogen hundreds and hundreds of miles, and huge opportunities for solutions to be found. So we think that could well be a project on the taking CO2 from Europe and, transporting it into a reservoir in the UK waters or Norwegian waters. Pipelines probably would be the best way to do that. And again, that will pose technical challenges, but I think it's all doable. It's just whether or not there's an economic market for it, and that comment drives everything.
On the interconnector point, I think that's a hugely important aspect in terms of the scale of the potential that we've got around the UK for offshore wind. It's much bigger than the demand we actually need within the UK. And so from an electrical interconnector point, I think securing some of those projects now will stand us in good stead for exporting power in the future. And in fact, we've got one of our projects, the Senos project, we're coordinated with the national grid. The recommendation has coordinated us with an interconnector project. But currently that's a project for the future. But I think we need to bring some of those forward, and it's there's a huge potential there, I think.
David, you can have the last word.
Yeah, sorry, just two comments on actually tidal's really interesting. I think Stephen answered that well. We have real expertise in tidal, and be interesting to see how it really maps out. The one observation I make is that those developing tidal technology in the UK, they have really focused on UK supply chain. And when you spend £1 billion or 500 million on tidal power in the UK, 80-90% of that ends up back in our economy. At the moment, when we spend the same things on wind, we're seeing nothing like that percentage. So I think it is part of the story that is not being told. There is an absolutely UK supply chain piece that goes with tidal. We need to do a better job on that. And to echo a lot of the comments here, interconnection with Europe, I think you need that vision from a leadership level, which actually recognises our future is that integrated, particularly on power, carbon storage and hydrogen. I think that's absolutely the direction of travel that we need. And if I'm honest, I think the government sees that. I think it is that interconnectivity between carbon, hydrogen, etc. But actually it's also power markets. Getting back into an integrated European power market in a world where we need to drive down cost, where we need to share resource, where energy security is European energy security as well. Absolutely. So all the things we spoke about, interconnectivity, but also power markets and pushing the government to align our power markets. It will take cost out of both European and British bills. I think it's the right thing to do. It'll enhance our energy security.
Can I just, one last thing about the gentleman at the back, his comment about Europe and what you would like from your Europe. I think that was one of the questions. I quite like a lifting of restrictions on freedom of movement for people to actually go and live and work, if that's possible, in some form or fashion, because we're missing out on a lot of intellectual capacity that could be put to use, and certainly from a university's perspective as well. I think we're sacrificing an awful lot for immigration purposes.
Great note on which to end. There's coffee upstairs. You will be back here in 26 minutes, but can you give a big hand to the panel?